when you were born, what your house was like, and what your childhood was like.
Aha.
That's what I'm curious about.
All right.
But you were born Alexandra.
Wentworth.
What was your middle name?
I didn't have a middle name. I wasn't given a middle name until I was confirmed, and then in the church they give you a middle name. But I never liked that. It wasn't my real name. My real name is Alexandra Wentworth.
What was your confirmed middle name?
Pierre.
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 And you chose that?
Oh, my mother chose it because I couldn't think of anything, and she seemed to think I was pretty stubborn. Pierre is a stone in French, so I was known as Pierre.
What was your mother like?
She was very beautiful, and she was very talented, and she was multi-interested. She had a lot of wonderful interests that I enjoy to this day. She loved Shakespeare, she loved French, she loved people and society and relationships. She didn't love being a mother, I don't think. But particularly by the time she got to the fourth in line, which was me.
Okay.
It was like I was born in 1933, which the Depression had happened in 1929 when she had her third child. And it was a huge change for her and the whole family. They moved from a very commodious house in Greenwich, Connecticut, to an apartment in Spuyten-Duyvil, New York, which is up near Riverdale on the Hudson. Very different surroundings.
What prompted the change? Just the economic situation?
The economics, yes. They had to be sold. They had to be within commuting distance, where my father was a Wall Streeter.
Okay.
And so they were within commuting distance. Why they chose...
So he lost money when the stock market crashed?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was born there. I lived there until I was almost 3, I believe. I remember it sort of because I remember my nurses. I remember the nannies that looked after me. One was Nora and one was Clara. I loved Clara best of all. She had skin like milk chocolate, and she was perfectly wonderful. Then we moved, and of course moving is hard for everybody, and even for babies. So I was very upset when we moved out to Garden City, Long Island, which is a very attractive residential community, also within good commuting distance to Wall Street. And so we moved out there to a very nice house, maybe 4 bedrooms, probably only 1 bath, and then an upstairs room for our wonderful Aunt Mattie, who lived with us and looked after the house and looked after us. So that was a big move.
And your dad commuted to New York City?
And Dad commuted to New York City. And Clara came out one day, all the way out from wherever she came from, that wonderful world that she came from, came out to visit, and I was so overcome with seeing her again, I couldn't speak. And they kept prompting me, Clara's come all this way to see you, and I just couldn't do it.
How old were you?
I guess I was 3, a little over 3, not
Okay.
quite 4. So I still remember looking across at Clara thinking, I hope she knows how much I'm happy to see her. So it was a big move.
Was that the last time you saw Clara?
And that's the last time I saw Clara. She didn't make the effort to make that big trip again, but she was smiling, so I think it was okay.
You had 3 older siblings.
Yes.
Who was first? Who was the eldest? And
That
down
was
the line.
my wonderful sister Ginny.
Okay.
Virginia. And she was just great as an older sister. She was very athletic and very competitive. She could beat all the boys on the block at almost anything. Playing marbles or anything. She was really good. So I admired her enormously. The next was my brother Tom. He was my savior. He was on my side.
Okay.
And the third was my beautiful sister Betsy, who I've lost recently and I miss tremendously.
Of course.
and I admired and envied to great extent.
So, why did you envy her?
Oh, because she was so pretty. And a lot of the things that bothered me didn't bother her at all. She was very social. I always wanted to stay home and play house and work in the garden of all silly things. She always wanted to run out and be with the boys and girls on the block and have a good time.
Well, we all like different things.
I wasn't sure she didn't choose the better path, but that's the way it was.
And so when you say your brother Tom was on your side,
Yes.
what does that mean? Who are you fighting against?
Oh, well, we had teams. And Betsy and Ginny teamed up against Tom and me, because I was the outsider. And so he was my rescuer. And it was so unfair because there were two of them and then just dumb old me on Tom's side.
So why were they team up? They were older than you?
No, it's just the family dynamics, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 And I guess how much older was Tom than you? Or how much?
6 years.
And Ginny?
Ginny was 8 years.
Okay.
And Betsy was 3 or 4, depending on what time of year.
And what did Ginny do?
She became working in publishing. She went off to school at an early age. She was about 14 when she went down to Bryn Mawr School. And then she went off to Smith College. So there was a big gap when she wasn't there for us. But when she came back, she couldn't quite manage Smith scholastically, I think the problem was. Anyway, she came home and couldn't find a wonderful job at Doubledays, which was a publishing house out in Garden City, Long Island.
Okay.
They had a side press called Country Life Press. And she started there in publishing, and it was her career.
Wow.
Moved into New York when the time came, and it was her life career.
When did she pass away?
Oh, gosh. I was going to say yesterday.
We'll figure it out later. And your brother Tom, he was in the Navy?
And he was in the Navy. Again, he went away to school, went to Choate, and then joined the Navy. It was one of the wars, start of the Korean War, maybe. Anyway, it was the thing to do. So he went to the Navy, ended up graduating got the Navy got him through Yale, and had a career in the Navy, quite a distinguished career. Was many years at the Pentagon in Washington, and remained my best buddy, my savior.
Yeah. Do you know what positions he had, or?
He started out in Naval Air.
Okay.
And for a man who I know was claustrophobic, sort of runs in the family, my sister Betsy and I have that problem. He also had that problem, so I can still remember how brave he was. He started with Naval Air, and then at one point was assigned to submarines.
So he was flying?
So he was as a flyer
Okay.
for many years. He was the navigator as a flyer. He also had to serve in the submarines, which I knew was so difficult for him because I knew he was claustrophobic.
Mm-hmm.
And then went on to become a captain in the Navy. Went to war colleges, seemed to be very influential. I went to the Pentagon to visit him once when he was in Washington. And so I went down to the Pentagon to be with him.
Yep.
And it was great fun walking through that amazing building. Everywhere you went, people were saluting right and left. And my brother was being saluted all the time. Very impressive.
That is very impressive. Do you remember anything else about that trip, the Pentagon trip?
Yes. I'm always doing somewhat the wrong thing, so I drove in full confidence to the Pentagon. My brother works there. That's where you go. I drove up to the Pentagon. It was a very crowded parking lot, but there was a place right up in the front for visitors parking. So, of course, I was a visitor, so I parked right there. And I picked up my overnight case because I was going to be spending the night with him. I didn't know if I'd need it. So I walked with my little suitcase into the Pentagon. And I was stopped, of course, immediately, asked what I was doing. And I was like, oh, here, see my brother, Thomas Wentworth. Well, they got in touch with him, and he came racing through the corridors, and he said, Sandy, you're not allowed to bring suitcases into the Pentagon. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Okay. Where did you park? Oh, right out front. He said, that's for the vice president and people from the Senate. So I didn't cover myself in glory, but I had a very good time.
So did you have to move the car, or did he say?
Well, he didn't know until the end. Until the end of our wonderful visit, and I got to go to his office where I saw the big map, and they had ships all over the world. And well, now we'll move the destroyer into the Middle East because that's where action is happening. Not that we're going to do anything, but it's a deferring. Well, it was really fun. So at the end, he was going to escort me downstairs, be sure I got out of there in one piece. And he said, now where are you parked? I said, oh, right here.
Thomas Wentworth, your brother, was named after the first Earl of Stratford. Isn't that funny? Or was he not?
I guess he was named for my father, who was named Thomas Wentworth.
Was your father named for?
I'm assuming so.
Did he have was he Thomas Wentworth the third, or he was just Thomas Wentworth?
He was Thomas Wentworth. His name was Thomas Wentworth Foote, because grandmother was Mary Cecilia Wentworth, and she married Charles Seward Foote. They were divorced after 10 or 13 years, I'm sorry to say. And my father and his younger brother kept their names. They were Tom Foote, Bob Foote, until they went up to Yale. And whatever they teach him up at Yale, Dad thought, well, he still loved his mother and he still loved his father, but he wanted to take his mother's name. So instead of Thomas Wentworth Foote, he was Thomas Foote Wentworth.
What did he study at Yale? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay.
He went through Yale in 3 years. He went to the Sheffield School, which was a special school you could go through in 3 years.
Wow.
I think money was always a problem. I don't think that was easy for them, divorced parents and all that. So he went through in 3 years.
How did your parents meet?
I don't know. I can only assume they met at a party.
When they lived in?
They both lived in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mary Cecilia, did she have a big family, like siblings?
She did. She had 2 sisters and a brother. She had Catherine Wentworth Ruschenberger, Martha Wentworth Suffren, Martha something Suffren, I'm not sure if it was Wentworth. And her brother's name was, I think, Charles Chancellor Wentworth.
So her sister was Catherine Ruschenberg.
Yes,
Okay.
her oldest sister, and then her next sister was Martha, wonderful Aunt Martha. And then a brother who moved to Roanoke, Virginia, and that was the Charles Chancellor Wentworth.
So you remember them? They were, because they would have been your grandparents' age, I guess?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So Mary Cecilia, was she still alive, or?
Yes, I'm happy to say. As time went on, my parents moved to Garden City, as I've mentioned, and after quite some time, grandmother wasn't able to live alone any longer, and she came and lived with us, which was fraught. It was, I've always loved drama, and it was a lot of that. My mother and grandmother did not get along, and so it was no house was quite big enough to avoid that, but it was always kind of fun. Anyway, I loved grandmother. She was very exceedingly proper and exceedingly quiet and exceedingly strong. I was a great admirer of hers.
What did they fight about? Just household stuff?
No, there was no fighting. Nobody raised a voice. They just didn't speak. And my mother would say, "Here she comes." You go into the room. So it was pretty funny. I thought, as a teenager, I thought it was super cool.
Who did you side with more? Your mom or your grandma?
For me, it was my grandmother.
Yeah.
For my sister Betsy, it was my mother. So we had that little.
Well, I guess you guys were making teams, so you were used to that.
Yeah, we were used to that just kind of naturally. But no, it didn't seem like a team. It would seem like a family. But it was an interesting family. I thought I was kind of lucky to have a family. Had a lot going on.
Yeah. When did you first learn about the Wentworths and their history? Were you older, or was that part of?
I think I probably took to that rather young. I think
Was there events that you went to and stuff?
No.
With family or anything?
No, because I love, as you seem to love, stories. I love stories about people. One reason I love, having lived in the Princeton area for as long as I have, I can see people and I know them from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I know their stories, and I think that's fun. So I've always been interested in the stories behind my family. And the Wentworth story struck a chord with me. I've always enjoyed that.
Definitely does. Your dad, was he nice?
He was perfectly wonderful. Every inch a gentleman, very gently spoken. The only time I've ever heard him raise his voice. We had this wonderful Aunt Mattie in the kitchen who looked after me and looked after the household and did everything that needed to be done. And she was from New Orleans, and her mother had been a slave, we were told, and I believe that's true. Anyway, she was a wonderful part of our family. She was the cook. And my father liked his poached eggs on toast every morning before he left to go to New York. And one morning, it must have been at the beginning of the war, the Second World War, because there was rationing. And my father let out a bellow. He was served his poached eggs on toast. It seems Aunt Mattie had used margarine on the toast, not butter. It's the only time I really heard him very upset.
He was?
He was very upset. Never happened again.
Never happened again. What was the food like?
It was great, especially desserts. Aunt Mattie could make something called blancmange because she was from New Orleans, old-time New Orleans. She could cook like a French chef. So there was something called blancmange for dessert, which was a vanilla custard with a rich chocolate sauce on it, a floating island, that kind of thing. That was wonderful.
Wait, you said Aunt Mattie her mom was a slave, or?
Her
No.
mother, her mother had been a slave. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it? What was it like with the communities where you lived? Was it mostly white people and with housekeepers, or is it?
Yes, we were, I think, the only ones on the block that still had housekeepers. In earlier days, everybody had help in the family.
In Garden City.
In Garden City.
Okay.
I imagine. But when we moved there, which was in the late 30s, it's in the 30s, the Depression had hit pretty hard, and people, by and large, didn't have live-in help. We did, and we were very fortunate.
So your dad recovered, and
Mm-hmm.
everything was doing. You guys were doing well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we had a good life.
Good.
We had a good life.
But it must have been. What was the town like, Garden City? Was it big?
No, it's still called a village, I believe. It's called the village of Garden City. It was very strictly controlled. As a matter of fact, thinking back, I understand they had they had an unwritten law, maybe a gentleman's agreement. No blacks were allowed, I think, or no blacks could buy, probably. Maybe no Jews as well. I don't know. So it was, in that case, strongly and carefully regulated, segregation-wise.
Would you, was that pretty common? It was pretty commonplace back then, I'm
Well, I
assuming.
think it was.
Yeah.
I think it was
The
a gentleman's understanding. I don't think there was
unspoken.
anything written, or maybe there was, or maybe there wasn't, but
Yeah.
there was no question that that's the way it was.
You are pretty open-minded. What what makes you more progressive, I guess? Growing up, was there a teacher or a parent or somebody who said to be kind to others or respect is...
The formative time for me when I realized that there was a difference between blacks and whites, and of course, they all seemed wonderful to me. Clara was milk chocolate. Aunt Mattie was just an old black woman, and I loved her dearly, and I didn't feel any difference. But then when I went off to school, now at school, in the public schools, I think it was in 7th grade, we belonged to a club called the Garden City Casino, where we played tennis and had dancing class and stuff like that. And there was a little girl who was in my class, Isabel Bobian. And my mother had said she'd give a birthday party, and who would I like to have? So of course I had Isabel and some of my close friends. And I remember my mother smiling, and I didn't like the way she smiled. What was she smiling about? And she said, well, yes, I think that would be nice. We'll ask Isabel. It was a big deal for her. I didn't know that. At any rate, long story short, Isabel was not allowed to come to my party. Her parents were the stewards at the Garden City Casino, where we belonged to. And I think that they had been afraid. My mother tried to explain to me they might have lost their job if Isabel had come to my birthday party. And of course it didn't make sense to me, but I understood the words, I just didn't understand it.
Gotcha.
So sadly, Isabel didn't come to my party, and we were never good friends again. And that was a big loss to me. And I think that made a difference in my whole thinking about blacks and whites in schools and people being together. I don't want that to happen again.
Made you curious about why that happened, and then you started
And then
thinking
I'm
about
thinking,
it. And
that's just, it's not the way I want to live.
yeah.
That's not right.